Hello, Helena. I'm Emily McVeigh, Executive Director of the United Way of the Lewis and Clark area, and we're here for our United Way Partner Spotlight. Joining me today is Sara Hess, the new Director of Casa of the Lewis and Clark area, and many other, we were just talking about how long your name is these days. Yep. Tell us about Casa. What does Casa do?
Sure. So Casa stands for Court Appointed Special Advocates, and we are a 501c3 organization. We're volunteer driven, and basically what we do is we provide volunteer guardian ad litems to serve children who have been victims of abuse or neglect and to advocate for their best interest in the 1st Judicial District, which is why we're specifically Lewis and Clark and Broadwater counties, because that's the area that we cover.
Good to know, Lewis and Clark and Broadwater counties.
Yep.
All right, how many volunteers do you have? And how many kids are they currently serving?
Sure. So as of today, we're serving about 114 kids with 54 active Casas. I think only about 44 of them are currently assigned to cases. They kind of fluctuate as cases close and new volunteers take assignments. But so that's about 75% of the kids that are currently in foster care. Year to date, so just for 2022, we've served about 133 total of the kids that have come into care.
So is there a wait list for Casa volunteers?
There is. There's probably about, as of today, I think there's like 32 kids on the wait list. Now, that does mean that typically our staff is monitoring those cases, so it's not like they're just kids out there that we have no knowledge of and we're not following and making sure their needs are being met. So we do keep a little bit of a wait list that as soon as we have a volunteer that is a good fit for those cases, they'll jump on those and start advocating for those kids as well.
Great. What does a Casa volunteer do?
Yeah, great question. So volunteers are court-appointed, trained, and committed adults who advocate for the child's needs and make sure that their voice is being heard in court. They are essentially the eyes and ears of the court. So what happens is when a child is removed from their home and they enter the court system, the judge appoints a volunteer to represent that child and represent their best interest. And so they will do things like visit the child on a regular basis, at least monthly is our requirement. And they'll just get to know the child, get to know his or her situation, talk to whoever may have knowledge of that child and be able to shed light on what's best for them and what their needs are, and basically follow the case through court and walk with that child. The biggest thing that volunteers do is create written court reports to the judge, which basically gives their recommendations about what's in the child's best interest. And that just sort of gives the district judges a better picture of what's going on with the child and helps them to make a better, more informed decision for the child as we move through those cases.
Who is eligible to be a Casa volunteer?
So really that's the unique thing about Casa volunteers is anybody can be a Casa. They're just regular citizens. There's not a requirement that you have to be an attorney, you have to have a degree in social work. Those things are of course helpful, but it's by no means a requirement. So really if you're 21, that's the age requirement, and you can pass a background check, can commit some time to serving kids, then you are eligible to be a Casa volunteer, because we do provide training and support as you go. So if you're not experienced in the dependent neglect world or in the legal system, then it's okay, because we provide some support and some training as you go to sort of walk with you through your work as you're walking with that child.
Great. What does the screening and training process look like? What kinds of things does a person learn as a volunteer?
Yeah. So as far as screening, it's much like applying for a job. You just fill out the application, send us some references, and do an interview. And you have to be able to pass some fairly extensive background checks. We want to make sure we're putting the safest people around vulnerable kids. But the pre-service training essentially covers those topics that you would need to be able to enter into the court system with sort of a basic knowledge of what's going on. So it's going to cover things like how the child welfare system works, some aspects of the legal system, and also just learning some topics like child trauma, risk factors like substance abuse, domestic violence, mental health, the things that really affect the kids that come into the system. We sort of cover all of that to some degree, but it is just sort of an introductory means of understanding what this work looks like, and a lot of the real training comes once you get assigned to a case and you're able to actually be the boots on the ground, seeing how all of this is playing out.
And there's ongoing training available as people find a different need or something that the child needs that they might not know about. There's
Yes.
ways to get them training in those
Yep.
arenas.
We try to make sure we are stewarding people well as they come into this work. It's very important work, but we want to make sure that volunteers have the tools to do it well. And so we offer at least monthly in-service training opportunities. It's required that every volunteer gets 12 hours each calendar year just to make sure they're continuing their education. But we kind of provide different training. Some of that just includes peer support, so volunteers get to chat with other volunteers who are going through some of the same things, and they can share advice, share experiences, and share resources in that way, which is really helpful. And they can also let us know sort of what the challenges are that are coming up for them, and based on that, sometimes that'll mean, hey, we should have a training with Emily McVeigh or somebody to like let us know about resources in the community, or whatever the need is. As we're seeing volunteers work out their experience, we'll try to make sure we provide some resources and get the experts in the room to really share with them what they need to know.
Yeah, I think I've been on and provided information about our 211 hotline
Yep.
and website so that the Casas all know that's a resource to them.
Yes.
Not just the person in need, but
Yeah.
definitely a great resource for people to access for all kinds of topics.
Yep, I had lots of them come to me afterwards and say, this is so great.
And a lot of people don't know it exists, so
Yep.
it's always good to keep sharing that information.
Yeah.
What you said, people have to have time available to be a Casa. What's the time commitment? What does that look like for a Casa volunteer?
Yeah, I would say that that's probably one of the most important features of the volunteer work that not a lot of people expect necessarily when they come in, is that it is a larger time commitment than your typical volunteer experience. It's not just something that you can just kind of show up to, and check off the boxes and do some tasks and go home. It's something where you're really getting involved in the life of a child and the life of families, sometimes at the worst point in their lives. And so you want to be able to just really be present and be committed to the child. So that sounds great, but in terms of practicality, we do ask that Casas, as much as they can, commit to seeing their first case through. So if they're assigned to a child, we ask that you do everything in your power to walk with that child from the beginning of the case until it's dismissed by the court. Sometimes that can be upwards of a year and a half, sometimes much longer, depending on just how the system goes and what happens for that child. And so we ask that you commit at least to a year of service, and hopefully as long as the child needs you to be their advocate, which can be a pretty long time. The time commitment month to month can vary. I know a lot of volunteers say that it's a lot more extensive as you first get started because you're sort of getting all of this information for the first time, and so you want to be able to spend lots of time reading through case files and just getting to know all of the players. So it can taper off as you go. But as life happens, the system is no different. These kids have changes that occur rapidly in their situation, in their circumstances, and so it kind of varies from month to month. Sometimes it can be as few as just 8 to 10 hours a month making some calls, visiting the child, and then other times it can be a lot more extensive than that, just depending on what's going on in the case. There's also a lot of time spent in court. Yeah, you've probably been there, you know about that.
I was just going to mention that. A lot of meetings, a lot of court.
Yep, and the benefit is that a lot of those do happen, they're scheduled in advance, so it's not like things are coming up on a day-to-day basis all the time. So we have volunteers that are retired, we have volunteers that work full-time. You can manage it as long as you know how to manage your schedule and really what you have to give. But there is a lot of waiting, a lot of just being in the room where important decisions and important conversations are happening so that you can show up and advocate for that child in whatever decisions are being made.
Yes. What kind of impact do Casa volunteers have on kids? You said they're with them at least a year or more, especially with teenage kids I've seen.
Yep.
They really become the one adult.
And that's the one thing that really sets Casa apart from the other players that are involved in the child welfare system. We're typically the only one that's not paid to be there. You're a volunteer that's coming in and your vested interest is in that child's best interest. And so Casas are often the one constant that stays with the child from the beginning of the case. The nature of the professionals in the system is there's a lot of turnover, there's reassignments of attorneys, of caseworkers, and that's just the nature of how that goes, but it really is difficult sometimes for the children and the families that are involved to have just adults constantly coming in and out of their lives. So the Casa first and foremost functions as that one person to follow the child and follow the case from the beginning and have a full picture. I would say that in our area, we're very fortunate that our district judges really listen to Casa, and they value our recommendations, they value our court reports. And so they do listen and hear us out. That doesn't always mean that everything is going to be perfect at the end of the day, that every time we say this is what should happen, that's what the judges decide. They have the responsibility of taking in so many different pieces of information, but really we're there to kind of make sure they have all the information that they need to make the best decision for those kids.
Yeah, the Casas are really valued and respected in our community, so that's really great. Yeah. You talked about training and the peer support. Is there other supports that are offered to new Casas as they learn the ropes?
Yeah, for sure. So one of our recurring meetings that we have every month is called Tuesdays with Casa, and it's basically just an opportunity for community building. So all Casa advocates can come together and just not only share what's going on for them, but just hear from one another and share their experiences as kind of just a way to build community within the Casa family. We also do something similar called Casa Lunch Hour, which is just an opportunity for people to share their challenges, their successes, and we try to promote a lot of opportunities to remind you that you're not in this alone. Being a Casa can sometimes be like solitary work because you're on your case, it's confidential, so you're not really able to share a lot of times what you're going through with anybody in a specific way. And so we try to provide lots of opportunities for Casas to be sharing with one another. And then of course we've got 2 full-time staff supervisors that are advocate supervisors. They are just there to support the work that's being done in the advocacy, and I take part in that myself sometimes, and we're really just there to kind of back the volunteers up and make sure they have all of the tools that they need to be able to do their work well.
Great. So if somebody's interested in becoming a Casa volunteer, what are the next steps?
So the training classes happen on a rolling basis. In the past, we kind of had a system where we could only offer training classes every so often. So sometimes it was, once or twice a year you had to get into that training class if you wanted to come on board. But we've shifted that mode so that now we offer a guided learning format, which is basically some time spent independently where you can go through some material, do some homework by yourself, and then some time spent in a small group format with a few other folks and a facilitator from our office doing training. So it also happens really based on people's schedules, which is a lot nicer. So you can sort of take it on whenever you're ready to get started. And we have those probably every 8 weeks or so. We're starting a new training class. So if somebody's interested, they can go to our website and there's a tab, I think it says volunteer or get involved, and you can fill out the application and then we'll reach out as we review applications and get the ball rolling.
All right. If somebody's interested in volunteering with Casa, but they aren't ready to be a Casa yet, are there other ways they can volunteer with you guys?
Yeah, for sure. So we also have an opportunity called Friends of Casa, which is basically, like you just said, those who are interested in supporting our organization, but may not have the time or the ability to commit to work in a case full-time. And if that's the case for you, then you can help out in other ways in terms of our fundraising and outreach opportunities. We just brought on a new staff member, Tammy High, who is functioning as an advocate supervisor, but she also has lots of great ideas for fundraising and some outreach initiatives that she'll be looking for a team to kind of help her carry out. So those are some ways that you can get involved as well.
Right. So speaking of, do you have any upcoming events? Are you guys going to be able to do your fundraiser this year? I know the last fundraiser was right before COVID, and I won the costume contest.
Yes, I do remember that.
So that was a fun time.
Yeah.
Is there anything like that coming up? Other events that we should know about?
Yeah, so we're hoping to get another fundraiser here, hopefully in the fall this year. Might be virtual, might be something in person. With COVID, we've really just tried to be mindful of just keeping everybody safe and making the best decisions for having fun events, but allowing it to be done safely. So we're still hoping that there will be some kind of fundraiser this year. It probably won't look quite the same. We won't be having costume parties necessarily, but for sure in 2023, we'll be hoping to resume our annual Light of Hope fundraiser in the spring. In addition, though, we have some social media campaigns that'll hopefully be coming out in April because, as you probably know, April is National Child Abuse Prevention and Awareness Month. So wear your blue in April and send us your pictures on social media of folks wearing their blue to support child abuse prevention.
Right. Yeah, and you guys had quite a successful virtual fundraiser last year.
We did.
So yeah, hopefully we keep that stuff going, supporting Casa. So welcome, Sara. Sara is the new director. How long have you been in the new position?
Since about February of this year, so not very long.
Yep, did a great job. Thank you for joining us. Anything else last minute before we sign off?
I don't think so. Thanks for having me.
They can find information on your website, which is rolling along the bottom of the screen throughout the video. And it's a little bit long again, but yeah, get a hold of Sara at Casa. Thank you, Helena, for joining us again for the United Way Spotlight. See you again next week.